Hello everybody. So today we are going to continue with our earlier video, Need for Management. So this is the second part. In the earlier video we discussed about Taylor and Fayol, and today we are going to look into a couple of other management thinkers. Henry Gutt was a follower of Taylor, so he also adopted the scientific method of looking at management. And he gave us what was known as the Gantt chart, and this later developed into PERT and CPM charts. You will understand more about this PERT and CPM when you are going to discuss the last function of management, that is controlling. Basically, this Gantt chart was a blueprint of the timeline that is going to be required to complete a project. So there are milestones out there, and if you have this chart in front of you, as the work progresses, you can always look back on the chart and check whether you are on track or not in terms of time. And he also introduced the concept of incentives, which means that if you do more than the average worker, if you produce more than the standard that is given to you, you are going to get some kind of incentives. Then we have the husband-wife team, and Frank Gilbreth also followed Taylor's principles. He was a bricklayer by profession, and he was interested in wasted motions. So his objective was that let me try and reduce these unnecessary motions so that the worker is more productive. He can produce more at any given point of time. Lillian Gilbreth was an industrial psychologist, and she was interested in the human aspects of work. And she is also referred to as the First Lady of Management. Hugo Münsterberg. Not only did he have a PhD in psychology, but he was also a medical doctor. And he was interested in applying psychology in the workplace. He tried to find out, is it possible to match mental qualities of the worker with the kind of work given? He was also interested in knowing what are the psychological conditions needed for best output. And in this process, he was interested in mutual benefit of both the managers as well as the workers. Hugo Münsterberg is often referred to as father of industrial and organizational psychology. Then came the Hawthorne experiment, which was a turning point in the history of evolution of management. So you have two researchers, Elton Mayo and F.J. Roethlisberger, who was conducting some studies at the Western Electric Company. So the research was to study the effect of illumination and other conditions on productivity. They were trying to find out what are the factors that are responsible for increased productivity. So a test group was created, which means that in the factory you have these n number of workers out there. From there, a small group was created who was willing to volunteer for the test. And on these workers, that is the test group, different factors were varied. Illumination, light was increased, light was decreased, rest hours increased, decreased, working hours increased, decreased, rewards and incentives increased, decreased, and many other factors were varied. But to the surprise of the researchers, they could not find out any correlation between these factors and the level of output. Even when the light was diminished, and as long as the workers could see what was happening, the productivity kept on increasing. So which means that they had to think a little differently. And then they found out that productivity was independent of any changes in the workplace. That is what we have just said. And it depends on a number of social factors like morale, satisfactory relationships, sense of belongingness, effective management. So how did they come to this conclusion? See, this test group is a small group. It has limited number of people. And when there is limited number of people, the supervisor obviously gets to know these people on a one-to-one basis, on a personal basis. And in a small group, the bonding is also very strong. All right. And they knew that this was a test group and they were determined to give their best. So therefore, even if you changed all the other factors, physical factors, it really did not bother. But what meant a lot to them is this interpersonal relationships. And therefore that increased their morale, and that is why their output also went up. It increased. Now let's move to this McKinsey 7S framework. So McKinsey has provided a 7S framework which consists of strategy, structure, systems, style, staff, shared values, and skills. You can see that the first three I have color coded in red. So these we refer to as the hard elements. Hard elements in the sense that this is tangible, this is measurable. You actually get to see them. While the ones in green out here, these four elements, they are intangible elements. You can only experience and feel them. So strategy is systematic allocation of resources to achieve the company aim. And when we talk of structure, we are talking of the organizational structure, the hierarchy out there, and authority responsibility relationships. Systems means the procedures and processes that are followed in that organization. That is, like how the work is done. Style is how management behaves. So basically it's a leadership style. Staff, we are talking of people in the organization, but we are talking of their intrinsic talent. Shared values, these are the core values of the organization. And skills. Remember when we talked of staff, we said intrinsic talent of the people. Here skills, we are talking of distinctive capabilities of the organization and also the people. So it is more of, what is the organizational USP? What is it strong in? So this framework was used to assess where the organization stands and what are the areas in which improvement is required. So shared values, if you place it in the center, you will link it up with all the other S's, and all the other S's are also again interlinked. So this was about McKinsey 7S framework, and you can see that it is related to your 5 functions of management. Strategy is planning, structure, systems will come under organizing. Then you have staff, that is staff and style together. If you take, that is your leading function. And you have controlling. Controlling can be related with your systems and procedures. And the staffing function is, of course, your staff as well as skills, if you can take together. Let's understand managerial roles. Managerial roles, we have clubbed them in 3 categories. The first one is interpersonal roles, second is informational roles, third is decision roles. As a manager, you get to play the role of a figurehead. So this is, when you represent your organization. So if there is any important function in your organization, your general manager comes and then, he inaugurates the function and all that. So therefore, he's the figurehead at that point of time. Or when you talk of large private sector organizations, there is one name that, or one face that comes to your mind. If you talk of the Tata Group, Ratan Tata comes to your mind. So he is the figurehead. And of course, we know that all managers have to play the role of a leader, and they also have to do liaising work. They have to coordinate among different groups, maybe internal groups, maybe external groups. So that is liaising. Then information roles. Manager also receives information from some sources, has also to disseminate information to other sources. And when you are disseminating information to external stakeholders, you are playing the role of a spokesperson. Third is the decision roles. Entrepreneurial role. You may be wondering, where is this place for entrepreneurship within an organization? But every time you come up with a new strategy, you are taking some amount of risk out there. So therefore, that is an entrepreneurial role. Disturbance handler is that when there are certain disturbances in the organization in terms of conflicts, then the manager has to get into the role of, soothing these disturbances. Resource allocator. For example, if you are the finance manager, your major resource with you is money, and there are so many departments clamoring for money. You have to use your wisdom in allocating these resources. Negotiator. The negotiator role comes in when we are bargaining for resources. So if you are the department representative and you are talking with finance, you must negotiate so that you get the best deal and you get the funds that are required for your department. Negotiator role can also come in when there is a conflict between employees and the employer. So we discussed now the last part of need for management. Let us understand the external environment and how it affects management. So you can see that the organization is affected by these 5 factors out here. The economic factors, political and legal, ethical, social, technological. So we'll go through them one by one. Economic factors. Capital. We all understand the importance of capital. If funds are not available, it is difficult to perform. Then labor. Availability of labor is also another important factor. If the workforce is easily available within the vicinity of your organization, you will have no issues in hiring people. Otherwise, you will have to hire people from different towns, different cities, maybe different states also. Price level. As the price levels of your raw materials go up, so will the cost of your product. And when the cost of your product goes up very high, you need to understand and find out whether it is still going to be a competitive product or not. When tax rates increase, the company will have to pay more tax, and as a result, their profit will be on the lower side. Then customers. We have to not only hunt for new customers, we also have to find out ways and means to retain the existing customers. Then let's move to technological decisions. It is a question of leasing or buying a equipment. If you have enough money and fund is not a problem, you can consider buying the machine. Buying the machine, the advantage is that it is your machine, you have ownership over that, and you are entitled to depreciation charges. However, if you do not have enough funds and you still need a machine, you will have to take it on lease. So when you take it on lease, the machine is like almost yours, but of course you're not the owner, so you don't get the depreciation benefit. The advantage is that you don't have to spend money upfront. You know, if the machine cost was 10 lakhs, you don't have to spend 10 lakhs. What you are doing is every year you are paying out an annual lease rental. So therefore it is easy on the pocket for you. And also, if technology changes, you can always change the machine. You have that advantage. Then let's understand social factors, attitudes and beliefs. These are customer attitudes and beliefs which influence them in their buying decision. For many years, when mushroom was first introduced into the market, very few people would actually go and experiment with it and buy mushrooms and eat it. Most of the people thought mushrooms were poisonous. So therefore, that belief of theirs stopped them from buying mushrooms. Then we have political and legal. See, whenever there is a change in the government, there are going to be certain changes in policies, and you can see that these policies are favoring a few big industrial houses. It is why? Because they have great lobbying power, so they can do that. And then there are anti-pollution laws. It is mandatory that if you have whole lot of effluents which are coming out from your factory, you must make sure that you take care of them before you dispose it off. Or if you have too much of smoke coming out, you must take care of that. So there are anti-pollution laws also in place, and you have no choice but to abide by them. And the last one is the ethical. It is the social responsibility of a business. Ethical is that please deliver what you have promised. Don't over-promise and under-deliver. Do not use unethical means of production. Do not use unethical advertisements. So these were the 5 factors that affect an organization. And with this we conclude part 2. Thank you very much for tuning in.